Welcome, warriors and shield maidens, to VK Tales, your Skald, ready to take you on epic journeys through the icy fjords and blood-soaked battlefields of the Viking world. Before we begin, raise your mead horns and swear loyalty to our clan. Subscribe to the channel, tell us in the comments which village you're watching from, and raise your thumbs as a sign of approval to the gods, and click the like button. Now, settle in close to the fire, because the scream tore through the pre-dawn darkness, ripping me from my slumber. For a moment I lay frozen, my mind struggling to separate nightmare from reality. Then the acrid smell of smoke hit my nostrils, and I knew this was no dream. I leapt from my bed, snatching my axe from its place by the door. As I burst out of my hut, the scene that greeted me was one of chaos. Orange flames licked at the edges of our village. Thundercliff, casting grotesque shadows against the cliff face that gave our home its name. Saxons! The cry went up, a chorus of fear and rage. The Saxons are upon us. I sprinted towards the commotion, my bare feet slapping against the cold earth. The sound of clashing steel grew louder, punctuated by war cries and screams of pain. As I rounded the corner of the mead hall, I came face to face with our attackers. They were a fearsome sight, these Saxon raiders. Their long hair and beards were matted with blood, their eyes wild with battle lust. One of them, a brute with a jagged scar across his cheek, locked eyes with me and grinned. "Look here, boys," he snarled in his guttural tongue. "A little shield maiden come to play." I didn't give him time to say more. With a roar that surprised even me, I charged, my axe singing through the air. The Saxon raised his sword to parry, but he was too slow. My blade bit deep into his shoulder and he went down with a howl. "Who's little now?" I spat, already turning to face the next threat. The battle raged on, a writhing mass of bodies and blades. I lost myself in the rhythm of it. Dodge, strike, parry, strike again. My arms grew heavy, my lungs burned, but I pushed on. This was our home, and I'd be damned if I'd let these dogs take it from us. As the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, the tide of battle turned. The Saxons, realizing they were outmatched, began to retreat. I watched as they fled back to their longships, leaving their dead and wounded behind. "Ingrid!" a familiar voice called out. I turned to see Olaf, my childhood friend, jogging towards me. His golden hair was dark with sweat and blood, but his blue eyes were bright with the fire of victory. "By the gods, woman, I've never seen you fight like that." I managed a weary smile. Someone had to show these Saxon dogs the error of their ways. Olaf laughed, clapping me on the shoulder. "That you did, my friend. That you did." But as I looked around at the aftermath of the attack, something nagged at me. The destruction wasn't as widespread as it should have been, given the ferocity of the assault. It was almost as if... "Olaf," I said slowly, "does something seem off to you about this attack?" He frowned, following my gaze. "What do you mean?" "Look at where they struck," I pointed out. "The granary is untouched, the forge too. They went straight for the outlying homes in the mead hall. It's almost as if they knew exactly where to hit us." Olaf finished, his expression darkening. Before we could discuss it further, the horn sounded, calling all warriors to the village center. We made our way there, joining the gathering crowd. Our chieftain, Gunnar Broadaxe, stood atop a wooden platform, his massive frame commanding attention. "My people," he began, his voice carrying across the square. "We have survived this cowardly attack. The Saxons thought to catch us unawares, but they underestimated the strength and courage of Thundercliff." A cheer went up from the crowd, but I noticed several faces that remained grim, exchanging worried glances. "But make no mistake," Gunnar continued, his tone growing serious. "This attack was different. The Saxons knew too much. They struck with precision, avoiding our strongest defenses." A murmur rippled through the gathering. I saw fear and suspicion flickering in the eyes of my neighbors and friends. "Are you saying what I think you're saying, Chief?" an old warrior called out, his voice trembling with anger. "That one of our own might have..." Gunnar held up a hand, silencing the crowd. I am saying nothing yet, but we cannot ignore the possibility. From this day forward, we must be vigilant. Watch not only for enemies without, but for any sign of treachery within. The meeting broke up soon after, but the tension lingered like a fog over Thundercliff. As I made my way back to my hut, I overheard snippets of conversation, accusations already flying. It must be one of the newcomers, one woman hissed to her neighbor. That Saxon bride, perhaps? Nonsense, came the reply. More likely it's old Bjorn. Everyone knows he'd sell his own mother for a bit of gold. I quickened my pace, trying to shut out the voices, but the seed of doubt had been planted and I couldn't shake the feeling that our real battle was just beginning. Back in my hut, I cleaned my axe meticulously, trying to lose myself in the familiar routine. But my mind kept racing, replaying every detail of the attack, searching for clues I might have missed. A soft knock at the door startled me from my thoughts. "Come in," I called out. Olaf entered, his face grave. "Ingrid, we need to talk." I nodded, gesturing for him to sit. "About the attack?" "About everything," he said, running a hand through his hair. "The things Gunnar said. Do you really think it's possible? That one of our own could betray us like that?" I was silent for a long moment, weighing my words carefully. "I don't want to believe it, Olaf. But we can't ignore the evidence. The Saxons knew too much. Someone had to have told them." Olaf's fist clenched. "If I find out who it is..." "We'll find them," I cut in, meeting his gaze steadily. "And they'll face justice. But we have to be smart about this. If we start throwing around accusations, we'll tear ourselves apart from the inside." He nodded slowly. "You're right, of course. So what do we do?" I stood, gripping my axe tightly. "We watch. We listen. And when the traitor reveals themselves, because they will, we'll be ready." As Olaf left, I turned to look out my small window. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across Thundercliff. In the fading light, every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat, every face a possible traitor. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. The battle with the Saxons had been straightforward, blade against blade, strength against strength. But this would be a different kind of war. A war of secrets and lies, of trust betrayed and loyalties tested. And as the last light faded from the sky, I made a silent vow. I would uncover the truth, no matter where it led. I would find the traitor in our midst, even if it cost me everything I held dear. For Thundercliff, for my people, for the truth. Little did I know then how high that cost would be, or how the search for the truth would shake the very foundations of everything I thought I knew. The sun had barely crested the horizon when I began my rounds through Thundercliff. The village was stirring to life, but there was an undercurrent of tension that hadn't been there before. Suspicious glances, hushed conversations that died as I approached. The poison of doubt was already spreading. I approached Helga, the village gossip, as she drew water from the well. "Morning, Helga," I called out, keeping my tone light. "Quite a commotion yesterday, wasn't it?" Helga's eyes darted around before settling on me. "Aye, Ingrid. Terrible business, that. But mark my words, we'll find out who's behind it." I leaned in, lowering my voice. "Have you heard anything? Any suspicions?" She bit her lip, clearly torn between caution and the desire to share what she knew. "Well, I shouldn't say, but I did see Bjorn the blacksmith sneaking about late the night before the attack. And you know how he's always going on about needing more silver for his work." I nodded, filing the information away. "Interesting. Thanks, Helga. Keep your eyes open, will you?" As I moved on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The weight of my task settled heavily on my shoulders. How do you find a traitor when you can't trust anyone? My path took me to the training grounds, where a group of young warriors was already hard at work. Among them was Eric, my brother, his face set in grim determination as he sparred with Olaf. I watched them for a moment, noting the fluidity of Olaf's movements, the strength behind Eric's strikes. As they finished their bout, I approached. "Well fought, both of you," I said, offering them waterskins. Eric grinned, wiping sweat from his brow. "Thanks, sister. Come to join us? I'm sure Olaf here could use another thrashing." Olaf laughed, but I noticed it didn't quite reach his eyes. Bold words from someone who just ate dirt. "What say you, Ingrid? Care to show your brother how it's done?" I shook my head, forcing a smile. "Another time, perhaps. I actually wanted to ask you both something." Their expressions sobered immediately. Eric stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Is this about the traitor?" I nodded. "I need to know if either of you saw or heard anything unusual in the days leading up to the attack. Anything at all, no matter how small it might seem." Olaf furrowed his brow. "Now that you mention it, I did see something odd the night before. I was walking near the cliffs, couldn't sleep, you know, and I saw a figure, cloaked and hooded, heading towards the forest. Thought it strange, but didn't think much of it at the time." "Did you see who it was?" I pressed. He shook his head. "Too dark, and they were moving fast. Could have been anyone, really." I turned to Eric, who was shifting uncomfortably. "Eric? What about you?" He hesitated, glancing around before speaking. I'm not sure if this means anything, but I overheard an argument between Bjorn and Astrid, the chieftain's wife. It was heated, something about a debt and promises unkept. Bjorn stormed off, cursing about how he'd show them all. My blood ran cold. This, combined with what Helga had said. "When was this?" "2 days before the attack," Eric replied. I nodded, trying to keep my face neutral. "Thank you, both of you. This could be important, but please don't speak of this to anyone else. We can't afford to spread rumors." As I turned to leave, Olaf caught my arm. "Ingrid, wait. Be careful, all right? This business, it's dangerous. If there really is a traitor among us, they won't take kindly to being hunted." I met his gaze, seeing genuine concern there. "I will, Olaf. I promise." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of questions and evasions. By midday, my head was spinning with half-truths and contradictions. I needed a moment to think, to piece together what I'd learned. I made my way to the edge of the village, seeking solitude, but as I approached the old oak that marked the boundary of Thundercliff, I heard raised voices. Instinctively, I ducked behind a nearby bush, straining to hear. "You fool!" It was Bjorn's voice, low and furious. "You promised me protection. Now the whole village is looking for a traitor, and your plan has put me right in their sights." "Calm yourself," came the reply, and I had to stifle a gasp. It was Astrid, the chieftain's wife. "No one suspects you, and even if they did, they have no proof. Just stick to the story we agreed upon." "And what if I don't?" Bjorn snarled. "What if I decide to tell them everything?" There was a moment of tense silence before Astrid spoke again, her voice cold as ice. "Then I suppose your dear wife might have an unfortunate accident. Cliffs can be so treacherous after all." I heard Bjorn's sharp intake of breath, followed by the sound of retreating footsteps. My mind was reeling. Bjorn and Astrid? Could they be the traitors we were looking for? But something didn't feel right. It was too convenient. Lost in thought, I didn't notice the figure approaching until it was too late. "Ingrid, what are you doing out here?" I whirled around to find Olaf standing there, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Olaf, I was just thinking. Needed some fresh air." He didn't look convinced. "Hiding in a bush? Come on, Ingrid. I know you better than that. What's going on?" For a moment, I was tempted to tell him everything. But the memory of the conversation I'd just overheard held me back. If Astrid was involved, how high did this conspiracy go? Who could I really trust? "It's nothing," I lied, hating myself for it. "Just the stress of everything, I suppose. I needed a moment alone." Olaf's expression softened. He reached out, placing a hand on my shoulder. I understand. This can't be easy for you. But remember, you're not alone in this. We're all behind you, Ingrid. We'll find the truth together. His words, meant to comfort, only twisted the knife of doubt deeper. I managed a weak smile. Thank you, Olaf. That means a lot. As we walked back to the village together, my mind was churning. The pieces of the puzzle were there, but they didn't fit. Bjorn and Astrid were involved in something, that much was clear. But were they the traitors we were looking for, or pawns in a larger game? And Olaf, his constant presence, his unwavering support, was it genuine concern for a friend, or something more sinister? The thought made my heart ache, but I couldn't dismiss it. Not now, when the safety of all Thundercliff hung in the balance. As we reached the village center, the horn sounded. Another attack. Panic erupted around us as warriors scrambled for their weapons. In the chaos, I locked eyes with Olaf. For a split second, I thought I saw something flicker in his gaze. Fear, guilt, but then it was gone, replaced by grim determination. Ready? He asked, drawing his sword. I gripped my axe tighter, pushing my doubts aside for the moment. There would be time for questions later. Right now, Thundercliff needed its defenders. Ready, I replied, and together we raced towards the coming storm, the shadows of doubt nipping at our heels. The attack had been repelled, but at a cost. As the smoke cleared and the wounded were tended to, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something crucial. The Saxons' assault had been fierce, yet strangely familiar, as if they knew exactly where to strike and when. I found myself standing before the village council, the air thick with tension and unspoken accusations. Gunnar Broadaxe, our chieftain, fixed me with a steely gaze. Ingrid, he rumbled, you've been asking questions. What have you learned? I took a deep breath, weighing my words carefully. There are suspicions, Chief. Nothing concrete yet, but suspicions aren't enough. Bjorn the blacksmith suddenly erupted, his face red with anger. My forge was targeted in this attack. Someone is feeding the Saxons information, and we need to find out who. I couldn't help but notice the way Bjorn's eyes darted nervously to Astrid, the chieftain's wife who sat silently beside her husband. The memory of their hushed conversation by the old oak tree burned in my mind. Gunnar raised a hand, silencing Bjorn. Peace, friend. Ingrid, continue. I nodded, choosing my words carefully. As I was saying, there are suspicions, but we must be cautious. Pointing fingers without proof will only tear us apart from within. And what of Bjorn? This from Astrid, her voice smooth as silk. There are whispers, Ingrid. Whispers that he was seen skulking about on the night before the first attack. Bjorn's face drained of color. What? That's a lie. I was in my forge all night working on a new batch of arrowheads. Ask my apprentice. The council chambers erupted into chaos, accusations flying. I watched as Bjorn's eyes met Astrid's, a flash of betrayal crossing his features before he masked it with indignation. Enough! Gunnar's voice boomed, silencing the room. He turned to me. Ingrid, I'm charging you with getting to the bottom of this. Find me proof, one way or the other. Until then, let no more accusations be made. Dismissed. As the council dispersed, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Olaf, his blue eyes clouded with concern. That was intense, he murmured. What do you make of it? I shook my head, leading him away from prying ears. I'm not sure, Olaf. Something's not right. Bjorn's definitely hiding something, but I don't think he's our traitor. Olaf frowned. What makes you say that? I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Just a feeling. Come on, I need your help with something. As night fell, Olaf and I made our way to the outskirts of the village. The plan was simple. We would take turns watching Bjorn's forge, hoping to catch him in the act if he was indeed our traitor. Hours passed with no movement. My eyelids were growing heavy when Olaf suddenly tensed beside me. Look, he whispered, pointing. A cloaked figure was slipping out of Bjorn's forge, moving with purpose towards the forest. Without a word, we followed, keeping to the shadows. The figure led us deep into the woods, finally stopping in a small clearing. As we watched from behind a thick oak, another cloaked individual emerged from the trees. "You're late," came a familiar voice, Astrid's. The first figure pulled back their hood, revealing Bjorn's weathered face. "I couldn't get away any sooner. The village is on high alert after the last attack." "Excuses," Astrid snapped. "Do you have it?" Bjorn produced a small pouch which Astrid snatched greedily. "The rest of the payment as agreed. Now about our deal." "The deal remains unchanged." Astrid cut him off. "You'll get your wife's medicine and your debts will be forgotten, but only if you continue to play your part." Bjorn's shoulders sagged. "And what if I refuse?" "This has gone too far, Astrid. People are dying." Astrid's laugh was cold and mirthless. "Then your dear wife's illness will take a sudden turn for the worse, and you'll find yourself facing the council as the traitor you are. Choose wisely, blacksmith." As Astrid melted back into the forest, Bjorn stood alone in the clearing, his head bowed in defeat. I felt a mix of pity and revulsion. He was no traitor, at least not willingly, but his weakness had put us all in danger. Olaf and I retreated silently, not daring to speak until we were well away from the clearing. "By the gods," Olaf breathed. "Astrid? But why? What could she possibly gain from betraying her own people?" I shook my head, my mind racing. "I don't know. But this goes deeper than we thought. We need to be careful, Olaf. If Astrid is involved, who knows how far this conspiracy reaches." We parted ways, agreeing to meet again at first light to discuss our next move. But as I lay in my bed that night, sleep eluded me. The web of lies and betrayal seemed to grow more tangled with each passing hour. Dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. I made my way to our agreed meeting spot, my heart heavy with the weight of what we'd discovered. But as the sun climbed higher, Olaf didn't appear. Worry gnawed at me as I searched the village, asking if anyone had seen him. It wasn't like Olaf to be late, especially not for something this important. As I approached his home, a chill ran down my spine. The door stood slightly ajar, swinging gently in the morning breeze. Drawing my axe, I pushed it open. "Olaf?" I called out, my voice echoing in the empty room. The inside was a disaster. Furniture overturned, possessions strewn about, signs of a struggle. And there on the table a scrap of parchment caught my eye. With trembling hands, I unfolded it. "The golden serpent strikes at midnight. The cliffside cave." The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the meaning was clear. This was a message meant for Olaf. A message from our mysterious traitor. But was Olaf the recipient of this message or its victim? My mind reeled with possibilities. Had Olaf been taken because he knew too much? Or had he been meeting with the traitor all along, only to have the meeting go wrong? I clutched the parchment, my knuckles white. The golden serpent. It echoed the dream I'd had nights ago, of a golden snake devouring Thundercliff from within. Was it a coincidence, or something more? One thing was certain. I couldn't face this alone anymore. The conspiracy ran too deep, the stakes too high. I needed allies, people I could trust implicitly. With a heavy heart, I made my way to find Eric, my brother. His recent marriage to a Saxon woman had placed him under suspicion, but blood ran thicker than water. If I couldn't trust my own brother, who could I trust? As I walked, the weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders like a physical burden. Olaf was missing, possibly in danger. Bjorn was being blackmailed. Astrid was orchestrating some grand betrayal. And somewhere out there, a golden serpent was preparing to strike. The future of Thundercliff hung by a thread, and I, Ingrid, stood at the center of this web of lies. With each step I steeled my resolve. I would unravel this mystery no matter the cost. For Olaf, for my people, for the truth. Little did I know, The real test of my loyalty and courage was yet to come. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across Thundercliff, I couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The golden serpent was poised to strike, and I had until midnight to stop it. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across Thundercliff as I made my way to Eric's home. My heart was heavy with the weight of recent events, Olaf's disappearance, the cryptic message, and the looming threat of the golden serpent. As I approached Eric's dwelling, I couldn't shake the nagging doubt that had taken root. Could I truly trust anyone, even my own blood? My hand to knock, but the door swung open before I could make contact. Eric stood there, his face etched with concern. "Ingrid," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I was just about to come find you. Have you heard about Olaf?" I nodded grimly. That's why I'm here. We need to talk, brother, in private." Ushered me inside, casting over his shoulder before shutting the door. The interior was warm and cozy, but I couldn't help noticing the tension in the air. "Elfrida," Eric called out, "could you give us a moment?" The back room emerged Eric's wife, her features standing out starkly against the Norse furnishings. She nodded silently, meeting mine for a brief moment before she slipped outside. Once we were alone, Eric turned to me. "What's going on, Ingrid? The whole village is buzzing with rumors. Some are saying Olaf is the traitor, that he's fled to join the Saxons." Shook my head vehemently. "Oh, Eric, Olaf's not the traitor. He's been taken, I'm sure of it. Look at this." I handed him the scrap of parchment I'd found in Olaf's ransacked home. Eric's brow furrowed as he read the message. "The golden serpent strikes at midnight. The cliffside cave." What does this mean? I'm not entirely sure, I admitted. But I think it's connected to the traitor we've been searching for. Eric, I need your help. We have to find Olaf before midnight. Eric's face darkened. Ingrid, I don't know if I can. Things have been difficult lately. People look at Elfrida with suspicion. At me. If I get involved in this... I felt a flash of anger. This is Olaf we're talking about, Eric. Our friend since childhood. How can you even hesitate? It's not that simple, Eric snapped, then immediately looked regretful. He lowered his voice. You don't understand what it's like, Ingrid. The whispers, the sidelong glances. Yesterday, someone threw a rock through our window, called Elfrida a Saxon whore. I felt a pang of guilt. In my single-minded pursuit of the traitor, I'd been blind to my own brother's struggles. I'm sorry, Eric. I had no idea things were so bad. But that's all the more reason to find the real traitor. Clear your name and Elfrida's. Eric ran a hand through his hair, conflict clear on his face. And what if the traitor turns out to be someone we know? Someone we care about? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. I thought of Bjorn, of Astrid, of all the faces I'd grown up with in Thundercliff. Could one of them truly be capable of such betrayal? Then we do what's right for Thundercliff, I said firmly, no matter how much it hurts. Eric nodded slowly. All right, I'm with you, but we need to be careful. If the traitor realizes we're onto them, they might panic and do something drastic, I finished. I know. That's why we need to move fast. The cliffside cave. That has to be where they're holding Olaf. We spent the next hour planning our approach. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the room in a warm orange glow, I felt a glimmer of hope. With Eric by my side, perhaps we stood a chance of unraveling this web of deceit. Just as we were about to leave, the door burst open. Elfrida stumbled in, her face pale with fear. Eric! Ingrid! She gasped. The Saxons! They're attacking again! We rushed outside to chaos. Flames licked at the edges of the village, and the clash of steel on steel filled the air. But something was different this time. The attack seemed more focused, more purposeful. As we ran towards the center of the village, I caught sight of a familiar figure. Bjorn, the blacksmith, fighting with a desperation I'd never seen before. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and I saw a mix of fear and resolve in his gaze. Ingrid, he called out. The forge! They're after the forge! Realization dawned on me. The weapons, the armor. If the Saxons captured our forge, it would cripple our ability to defend ourselves. This wasn't just an attack. It was a strategic strike. "Eric, go help defend the forge," I shouted over the din of battle. "I'll try to rally the defenders at the eastern wall." Eric hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Be careful, sister." As I fought my way through the melee, my mind raced. This attack, coming so soon after Olaf's disappearance and the cryptic message, it couldn't be a coincidence. The golden serpent was making its move, and we were running out of time. I had just reached the eastern wall when I heard a familiar voice cry out in pain. Turning, I saw Gunnar Broadaxe, our chieftain, fall to one knee, blood seeping from a wound in his side. A Saxon warrior loomed over him, axe raised for the killing blow. Without thinking, I hurled my own axe with all my might. It spun through the air, burying itself in the Saxon's back. He fell with a gurgle, and I rushed to Gunnar's side. "Chief," I helped him to his feet. "Are you all right?" Gunnar grunted, pressing a hand to his wound. "I've had worse, girl. But this attack, it's not right." They knew exactly where to strike when our defenses would be weakest. I nodded grimly. "I know. Chief, there's more going on here than just a Saxon raid. I think—" But before I could finish, a horn blasted from the direction of the forge. The signal for retreat. The Saxons were falling back. As the sounds of battle faded, replaced by the groans of the wounded and the crackle of fires, I helped Gunnar to the healer's hut. My mind was whirling with questions. Why had the Saxons retreated so suddenly? Had they gotten what they came for? I found Eric near the smoldering remains of the forge. His face was streaked with soot and blood, but his eyes were clear and determined. "Ingrid," he said as I approached, "we managed to drive them back, but they took something. A chest from Bjorn's private stores. He's beside himself." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Eric, we need to move now. Whatever's in that chest, I bet it's connected to the golden serpent. We have to get to the cliffside cave before midnight." Eric nodded, his face grim. "What about the village? They'll need every sword to help with the wounded and repairs." I looked around at the destruction, feeling the weight of my decision. We don't have a choice. If we don't stop this now, there won't be a village left to defend. As we slipped away from the chaos, gathering what supplies we could, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into a trap. The golden serpent had played its hand, sowing chaos and confusion. Now, as we raced against time towards the cliffside cave, I knew we were heading towards a confrontation that would change everything. The moon rose high over Thundercliff, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. In the distance, the cliffside loomed, dark and foreboding. Whatever secrets lay hidden in that cave, whatever truth awaited us, one thing was certain. By dawn, nothing would be the same. The forest was eerily quiet as Eric and I made our way towards the cliffside cave. The only sounds were our labored breathing and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. The moon hung low and full in the sky, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for us with grasping fingers. "Ingrid," Eric whispered, breaking the silence. "Are you sure about this? We're leaving the village vulnerable." I paused, turning to face my brother. In the pale moonlight, I could see the worry etched on his face. "We don't have a choice, Eric. If we don't find Olaf and uncover the truth about this golden serpent, there might not be a village left to protect." He nodded grimly, and we pressed on. As we neared the cliffs, a glint of something caught my eye. I held up a hand, signaling Eric to stop. "There," I whispered, pointing to a small clearing just ahead. "Do you see it?" Eric squinted, then his eyes widened. "Is that gold?" We approached cautiously, hands on our weapons. In the center of the clearing lay a small pile of gold coins glittering in the moonlight. I knelt to examine them, my heart racing. "These are Saxon coins," I murmured, turning one over in my palm. fresh minted by the look of them. Eric's face darkened. So it's true. Someone in Thundercliff is working with the Saxons. I pocketed a few of the coins as evidence, my mind whirling. But why leave them here? It's almost as if they wanted us to find them. Eric finished, his voice grim. A twig snapped somewhere in the darkness and we both whirled around, weapons at the ready. But the forest remained still and silent. We should keep moving, I said, my voice low. The cave can't be far now. As we continued our climb, the terrain grew steeper and more treacherous. The narrow path hugged the cliff face, with a sheer drop to our left. One misstep could mean a fatal fall. Suddenly, Eric grabbed my arm, pulling me to a stop. Listen, he hissed. At first I heard nothing but the whisper of the wind. Then, faintly, I caught the sound of voices carried on the breeze. We crept forward, hugging the cliff wall until we could make out words. Can't keep this up much longer, a male voice was saying, tinged with desperation. The village is in chaos, people are dying. Sacrifices must be made for the greater good, came the reply, a woman's voice cold and imperious. With a jolt, I recognized it as Astrid's. Once we have what we need, Thundercliff will be safe. You'll be a hero, Bjorn. I exchanged a shocked glance with Eric. Bjorn and Astrid here. What greater plan could possibly justify their betrayal? And what about Olaf? Bjorn demanded. He's innocent in all this. We can't just... Olaf made his choice when he started asking too many questions. Astrid cut him off. His fate is sealed. Now, did you bring what I asked for? There was a pause, then the sound of something heavy being moved. It's all here, Bjorn said, his voice heavy with resignation. Everything from the forge, just as you asked. Excellent, Astrid purred. With these weapons, our Saxon allies will be unstoppable. And once they've conquered the neighboring villages, Thundercliff will be spared. We'll be the most powerful settlement in the region. I felt sick to my stomach. Astrid wasn't just betraying Thundercliff. She was sacrificing every other village in the area to save her own skin. Eric tugged at my sleeve, gesturing for us to retreat. We needed to regroup, to figure out how to stop this madness. But as we turned to go, my foot dislodged a small stone. It skittered down the path, the sound impossibly loud in the quiet night. The voices in the cave fell silent. What was that? Bjorn's voice sharp with fear. Go check, Astrid commanded. And Bjorn, don't disappoint me. Eric and I exchanged panicked glances. We were out of time. Run, I hissed, and we took off down the treacherous path, no longer caring about stealth. Behind us, I heard Bjorn's shout of discovery, followed by the sound of pursuit. The path was narrow and slippery, made doubly dangerous by the darkness and our haste. My lungs burned as we ran, the edge of the cliff a constant, terrifying presence to our left. Suddenly, Eric cried out. I turned just in time to see him stumble, his foot slipping on loose gravel. He teetered on the edge for a heart-stopping moment before plummeting over the side. Eric! I screamed, diving for him. By some miracle, I managed to grab his wrist. He dangled over the abyss, his eyes wide with terror. Ingrid! He gasped. You have to let me go. You can't pull us both up, and they're coming. Never, I grunted, straining to hold on. I won't lose you too, brother. I could hear Bjorn getting closer, his heavy footsteps echoing off the cliff face. With a surge of desperate strength, I began to pull Eric up, inch by agonizing inch. Just as I managed to get him over the edge, a shadow fell over us. I looked up to see Bjorn standing there, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. For a long moment, we stared at each other, the only sound our ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart. Bjorn, I said, my voice hoarse. It doesn't have to be this way. Help us stop Astrid. It's not too late to do the right thing. Doubt flickered across his face. You don't understand, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She has my wife. The medicine, without it, Helga will die. Eric, still catching his breath, spoke up. There are other ways, Bjorn. We can find another healer, brew the medicine ourselves. But this? Betraying everything we stand for? That's not you. Bjorn's shoulders sagged, the fight seeming to drain out of him. I never wanted any of this. I just wanted to save Helga. Then help us now, I urged, getting to my feet. Tell us everything. Where's Olaf? What is Astrid really planning? Before Bjorn could answer, a new voice cut through the night. Yes, Bjorn. Do tell them everything. We all turned to see Astrid emerging from the shadows, a cruel smile playing on her lips. In her hand, she held a Saxon sword, its edge glinting in the moonlight. I'm disappointed, Bjorn, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. After everything I've done for you, for your precious Helga, and this is how you repay me? Bjorn stepped forward, placing himself between us and Astrid. No more, Astrid. This ends now. We'll find another way to save Thundercliff, one that doesn't involve betraying everything we hold dear. Astrid's face hardened. You fool. There is no other way. The Saxons are coming, with or without our help. I'm simply ensuring our survival. At what cost, I demanded? The destruction of every other village in the region? The lives of our friends and neighbors? A small price to pay for survival, Astrid sneered. But if you're so concerned about your precious Olaf, why don't you join him? With a flick of her wrist, she revealed a small vial filled with a golden liquid. My eyes widened in recognition, the same shade as the golden serpent from my dreams. One drop of this, Astrid said, her voice filled with a terrible pride. And your beloved Olaf will tell us everything he knows, every secret, every weakness of Thundercliff. And then, when we're done with him, his mind will be wiped clean. A perfect obedient soldier for our Saxon allies. Horror filled me as I realized the full extent of Astrid's plan. This wasn't just about weapons or gold. She was planning to turn our own people against us. You're mad? Eric breathed, voicing my own thoughts. Astrid's laugh was cold and mirthless. Mad? No, my dear Eric. I'm the only sane one here. The only one willing to do what's necessary to survive. As she spoke, she uncorked the vial, the golden liquid catching the moonlight. Now, who wants to be the first to join our little golden serpent family? In that moment, balanced on the edge of the cliff with betrayal and madness surrounding us, I knew that the fate of Thundercliff, and perhaps all of our people, hung in the balance. Whatever happened next would change everything, and there was no turning back. The cliff edge trembled beneath our feet as Astrid advanced, the vial of golden liquid glinting ominously in her hand. My mind raced, searching for a way out of this nightmare. Astrid, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, think about what you're doing. This isn't just about Thundercliff anymore. You're talking about enslaving our own people. Her laugh was cold, devoid of any warmth or humanity. Oh, Ingrid, always so noble, so short-sighted. Don't you see? This is the only way to ensure our survival. The Saxons are coming, and they will destroy everything in their path, unless we become their puppets. Eric spat, his face contorted with disgust. Astrid's eyes flashed dangerously. Unless we become their allies. Think of it, Thundercliff protected and prosperous while the rest of the world burns. Bjorn, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. And what about Olaf? Where is he, Astrid? A cruel smile played on Astrid's lips. Ah, yes, your dear friend Olaf. He's, shall we say, indisposed at the moment. But don't worry, you'll be joining him soon enough. As she spoke, shadows moved behind her. My heart sank as I saw Saxon warriors emerging from the cave, their weapons glinting in the moonlight. We were outnumbered and cornered. Now, Astrid purred, raising the vial. Who wants to be the first to taste the golden serpent's kiss? Time seemed to slow. I saw Eric tensing beside me, ready to fight. Bjorn's face was a mask of conflict and regret, and in that moment I made a decision. I'll do it, I said, stepping forward. Ingrid, no, Eric cried, but I held up a hand to silence him. Astrid's eyebrows rose in surprise. Well, well. The noble Ingrid offering herself up as a sacrifice. How touching. I stood my ground as she approached, the vial uncorked and ready. Just promise me one thing, Astrid. Spare my brother. Spare Thundercliff. She laughed, a sound like breaking ice. Oh, Ingrid, you're in no position to make demands. But don't worry, I'll make sure your sacrifice isn't in vain. As Astrid raised the vial to my lips, I locked eyes with Eric. In that silent exchange, I prayed he understood my plan. Then, just as the golden liquid was about to touch my mouth, I struck. My hand shot out, knocking the vial from Astrid's grasp. In the same motion, I grabbed her arm, using her momentum to throw her off balance. The vial shattered on the rocky ground, its contents seeping into the earth. Now, I shouted. Eric sprang into action, tackling the nearest Saxon warrior. Bjorn, seeming to shake off his indecision, grabbed a nearby rock and hurled it at another approaching enemy. Chaos erupted on the narrow cliff path. The clash of steel filled the air as we fought desperately against the Saxon warriors. I found myself back to back with Eric, our movements synchronized from years of training together. Just like old times, eh, sister? Eric grunted as he parried a blow. I managed a grim smile. Let's hope we're better at this than we were as children. As we fought, I caught glimpses of Bjorn. The blacksmith fought with the fury of a man trying to redeem himself, his hammer striking with deadly precision. But it was Astrid who commanded my attention. She had recovered from my initial attack and now wielded a Saxon sword with surprising skill. Her face was a mask of cold fury as she cut her way towards me. "You fool!" she hissed as our blades met. "You've doomed us all!" I gritted my teeth, pushing back against her assault. "No, Astrid. You did that when you betrayed your own people." Our duel took us dangerously close to the cliff's edge. Each clash of our swords sent sparks flying into the night air. Despite everything, I couldn't help but admire Astrid's skill. She had clearly been preparing for this moment for a long time. "It didn't have to be this way," Astrid said, her voice tinged with what almost sounded like regret. "We could have ruled together, Ingrid. You, me, shaping the future of our people. By turning them into mindless slaves," I shot back, deflecting another of her strikes. "That's not ruling, Astrid. That's tyranny." Our blades locked, bringing us face to face. In Astrid's eyes, I saw a mixture of madness and desperation. "You don't understand," she hissed. "The things I've seen, the visions the golden serpent showed me. The future is fire and blood, Ingrid. I'm trying to save us." Before I could respond, a cry of pain cut through the night. I turned to see Eric stumbling, blood flowing from a gash in his side. A Saxon warrior stood over him, sword raised for the killing blow. "Eric!" I screamed, my heart in my throat. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Bjorn, hearing my cry, turned and saw Eric's plight. Without hesitation, he threw himself between Eric and the Saxon, taking the blow meant for my brother. The distraction cost me. I felt a searing pain in my side as Astrid's blade found its mark. I stumbled, my back hitting the cliff wall. Astrid stood over me, her sword at my throat. "It's over, Ingrid," she said, her voice almost sad. "But don't worry. Soon you won't remember any of this. The golden serpent will—" Her words were cut off by a familiar battle cry. My heart leapt as I saw Olaf, battered but very much alive, charging into the fray. He must have escaped during the chaos. "Olaf!" I cried out, relief and joy flooding through me. Astrid turned, momentarily distracted by this new threat. It was all the opening I needed. Ignoring the pain in my side, I surged forward, tackling Astrid. We grappled on the edge of the cliff, each fighting for dominance. "Enough!" I growled, finally pinning her down. "It's over, Astrid, surrender." But there was no surrender in her eyes, only a cold, terrible resolve. "You're right, Ingrid," she said, her voice eerily calm. "It is over." With a strength born of madness, she suddenly pushed against me. I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet as we both tumbled over the cliff's edge. The world spun around me as we fell. I could hear shouts from above. Eric and Olaf calling my name. The wind rushed past my ears, drowning out everything else. Then, impact. Cold water enveloped me as we plunged into the sea below. The shock of it drove the air from my lungs. I thrashed, desperately trying to orient myself in the darkness. As I broke the surface, gasping for air, I saw Astrid nearby struggling against the waves. Our eyes met, and in that moment I saw the mask finally fall away. There was fear there, yes, but also a flicker of something else. Regret? Acceptance? Ingrid! Olaf's voice came from above. I looked up to see him and Eric peering over the cliff edge, their faces etched with worry. "I'm all right," I called back, my voice hoarse. "Throw down a rope." As I treaded water, waiting for rescue, I turned back to where I had last seen Astrid. But the waves were empty now, with no sign of Thundercliff's fallen chieftain. The battle was over, but as I floated there in the cold sea, I knew that our true fight was just beginning. The golden serpent's poison had spread far and wide, and it would take more than swords to heal the wounds it had left behind. As the rope descended from the cliff above, I gripped it with determination. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew one thing for certain. Thundercliff would face them together, united once more. The rope burned against my palms as Eric and Olaf hauled me up the cliff face. Each pull sent a jolt of pain through my side where Astrid's blade had struck, but I gritted my teeth and endured. As I neared the top, I could hear the labored breathing of my friends, their grunts of exertion mixing with the crash of waves below. Finally, strong hands grasped my arms and pulled me over the edge. I collapsed onto the rocky ground, my lungs burning as I gasped for air. For a moment, all I could do was lie there, feeling the solid earth beneath me and marveling at the fact that I was still alive. "Ingrid?" Eric's voice broke through my daze. I felt his hands on my shoulders, gently shaking me. "Ingrid, are you all right?" I forced my eyes open, meeting my brother's worried gaze. I'm okay," I managed to croak out. Just, need a moment." Olaf's face appeared next to Eric's, his usually jovial features creased with concern. "By the gods, Ingrid, you gave us quite a scare. When we saw you go over the edge with Astrid..." At the mention of Astrid's name, reality came crashing back. I sat up abruptly, ignoring the pain that flared in my side. "Astrid, did you see her? Did she..." Eric and Olaf exchanged a grim look. "There was no sign of her," Eric said softly. "The currents are strong here. If she didn't surface quickly..." The implications hung heavy in the air. Despite everything Astrid had done, the thought of her being claimed by the sea sent a chill through me. She had been our leader, our friend, before the golden serpent's poison twisted her mind. "We need to get back to Thundercliff," I said, struggling to my feet. "There's no telling what damage has been done." As if on cue, Bjorn let out a groan of pain. I turned to see the blacksmith propped up against a boulder, his face pale and drawn. The wound he'd taken defending Eric looked bad. "Bjorn," I said, moving to his side. "Hold on, friend, we'll get you help." He managed a weak smile. "Ingrid, I'm sorry. For everything. I thought I was protecting Thundercliff, but..." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "You made a mistake, Bjorn, but in the end you chose to stand with us. That's what matters now." As we prepared to make our way back to the village, Olaf filled us in on what had happened to him. "Astrid and her Saxon allies ambushed me," he explained. "They kept me drugged with that accursed golden liquid. I was aware of everything, but I couldn't control my own actions. It was horrible." I shuddered, imagining the terror he must have felt. "How did you escape?" Olaf's eyes hardened. "When the fighting broke out, my guards got distracted. The effects of the drug were starting to wear off, and I managed to overpower them. I've never been so glad for those wrestling matches we used to have as kids." Despite the gravity of the situation, I couldn't help but smile at the memory. Those carefree days seemed a lifetime ago now. Our journey back to Thundercliff was slow and tense. We had to support Bjorn between us, and every shadow seemed to hide potential enemies. But as we crested the final hill and the village came into view, we all stopped short. Thundercliff was in chaos. Fires burned in several buildings, and we could hear shouts and the clash of weapons even from a distance. The Saxon attack that had begun earlier was still ongoing. "No," Eric breathed. "We're too late." But I squared my shoulders, a new determination filling me. We're not too late, not yet. Thundercliff still stands, and as long as it does, we fight. We made our way down to the village as quickly as we could manage with Bjorn's injury. As we neared the gates, a group of defenders spotted us. "Hold!" a familiar voice called out. Gunnar Broadaxe, our battle-scarred war chief, stepped forward, his axe raised. "Identify yourselves." "Gunnar, it's us," I called back. "Ingrid, Eric, Olaf, and Bjorn. We bring news of treachery and warning." Gunnar's eyes widened as he recognized us. He barked orders to open the gates, and soon we were ushered inside the relative safety of Thundercliff's walls. "By Odin's beard," Gunnar growled as he took in our battered state. "What in the nine worlds happened to you lot? And where's Astrid?" As quickly as we could, we relayed the tale of Astrid's betrayal, the golden serpent's poison, and the true nature of the Saxon threat. With each revelation, Gunnar's face grew darker. "I knew something was amiss," he said, shaking his head. "The Saxons knew too much about our defenses, struck too precisely. But Astrid, I never would have believed it." "Believe it," Olaf said grimly. "I lived it. And there are others, Gunnar. Other villagers who've been dosed with the golden serpent's venom. They could turn on us at any moment." Gunnar cursed colorfully. "As if we didn't have enough problems. The Saxons have us surrounded and our supplies are running low. If we don't break this siege soon..." I stepped forward, my mind racing. "Gunnar, listen, I have a plan. It's risky, but it might be our only chance." As I outlined my idea, I could see the mix of doubt and hope warring on Gunnar's face. It was audacious, perhaps even foolhardy, but these were desperate times. "It could work," Eric said slowly, catching on to my thinking. "But Ingrid, the danger..." I cut him off. "We're all in danger, brother. But this is our home, our people. I'll not stand by and watch it fall." Gunnar studied me for a long moment, then nodded sharply. "Very well. We'll do it your way, Ingrid. May the gods be with us, for we'll need all the help we can get." As Gunnar began barking orders to put the plan in motion, I took a moment to look around at the faces of my friends and fellow villagers. There was fear there, yes, but also determination, courage, and something else. Hope. "Olaf," I said, turning to my old friend, "I need you to gather everyone who might have been exposed to the golden serpent's poison. We need to know who we can trust." He nodded grimly. "And those we can't?" I sighed, feeling the weight of leadership settling on my shoulders. "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. For now, just keep them contained and safe." As Olaf hurried off, Eric placed a hand on my shoulder. "What about me, sister? What would you have me do?" I met his eyes, seeing the unwavering support there. "I need you with me, Eric. Where we're going, I'll need someone I trust absolutely at my back." He grinned, a flash of our old sibling rivalry shining through. "Always cleaning up your messes, aren't I?" I punched his arm lightly, grateful for the moment of levity. Someone has to. As the village bustled with activity around us preparing for what was to come, I took a deep breath. The path ahead was fraught with danger, and there was no guarantee of success. But looking at the determination on the faces of my fellow villagers, I felt a surge of pride and resolve. Thundercliff had weathered many storms over the years, but this would be our greatest test yet. As the first light of dawn began to paint the sky, I silently vowed that it would not be our last. Whatever the cost, we would face this threat together, and Thundercliff would endure. With one last look at the village that had been my home for all my life, I turned to Eric. "Are you ready?" He nodded, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "Lead the way, sister." And with that, we set off into the uncertain dawn, carrying with us the hopes and fears of all Thundercliff. The final battle was about to begin, and the fate of our people hung in the balance. The pre-dawn mist clung to the ground as Eric and I crept through the forest surrounding Thundercliff. The sounds of battle had faded to an eerie quiet, broken only by the occasional clash of metal or distant shout. We moved silently, our steps careful and measured, every sense on high alert. "Ingrid," Eric whispered, his breath visible in the cool air. "Are you sure about this plan? It's not too late to turn back." I paused, turning to face my brother. In the dim light, I could see the worry etched on his face, mixed with a determination that mirrored my own. "We don't have a choice, Eric. If we don't stop the flow of the Golden Serpent's venom, Thundercliff will fall. If not to the Saxons, then to the poison within our own walls." He nodded grimly. "I know. I can't lose you too, sister." I reached out, gripping his shoulder tightly. "You won't. We're in this together, remember? Now come on, we're almost there." As we continued our journey, my mind raced with the details of the plan we'd hastily put together. Gunnar would lead a diversionary attack on the Saxon camp to the east, drawing their attention. Meanwhile, Eric and I would slip into their main encampment to the west, searching for the source of the Golden Serpent's venom. If we could destroy it, we might have a chance of breaking the Saxons' hold over our compromised villagers. The forest began to thin, and soon we could make out the flickering of campfires through the trees. We dropped to our stomachs, crawling the last few yards to the edge of the Saxon camp. The sight that greeted us made my blood run cold. Rows of tents stretched out before us, far more than we'd anticipated. Saxon warriors moved about with purpose, their weapons and armor glinting in the firelight. But it was what lay at the center of the camp that truly caught my attention. A large pavilion stood there, its sides painted with intricate designs of serpents woven in gold thread. Guards stood at attention around its perimeter, their posture rigid and unnatural. "By the gods," Eric breathed. "Look at their eyes." I squinted, trying to make out what he saw. With a start, I realized the guards' eyes had a faint golden sheen to them, visible even from this distance. "They've been dosed with the venom," I whispered. "They're under its control." Eric's hand tightened on his sword. "So what now? We can't fight our way through all of them." I scanned the camp, my mind working furiously. Then I spotted it, a small gap in the patrols, a blind spot between two tents. "There," I pointed. "If we time it right, we might be able to slip through." We waited, tense and silent, for what felt like an eternity. Finally, the patrol patterns aligned, and I nodded to Eric. "Now." We sprinted across the open ground, our hearts pounding. Just as we reached the gap, a shout went up from somewhere in the camp. For a terrifying moment, I thought we'd been spotted. Then I realized the commotion was coming from the opposite direction. "Gunnar's attack," Eric said, a grim smile on his face. "Right on time." Taking advantage of the distraction, we wove our way through the camp, ducking behind tents and crates whenever a Saxon warrior passed too close. As we neared the central pavilion, the air seemed to grow thick and heavy, as if we were wading through invisible syrup. "Can you feel that?" I whispered to Eric. He nodded, his face pale. "It's the venom. We must be close." Just then, a familiar voice drifted out from the pavilion, stopping us in our tracks. "The attack is merely a diversion. Double the guards on the western perimeter." I exchanged a shocked glance with Eric. "Astrid," he mouthed silently. My mind reeled. How had she survived the fall from the cliff? And more importantly, why was she here, in the heart of the Saxon camp? Before we could process this new information, the pavilion flap opened. Eric and I barely had time to duck behind a nearby weapons rack. I held my breath as footsteps approached our hiding spot. "You heard the lady," a gruff voice said. "Get to the western edge, and keep your eyes open for any of those Thundercliff rats." As the footsteps faded away, I risked a peek around the edge of the weapons rack. The area around the pavilion was momentarily clear. Now or never, I whispered to Eric. We dashed for the pavilion entrance. Just as we reached it, a hand shot out, grabbing my arm. I spun, ready to fight, only to find myself face to face with Astrid. I was wondering when you'd show up, she said, her voice unnaturally calm. Her eyes had the same golden sheen as the guards outside. Before either Eric or I could react, she pulled us into the pavilion. Quick, before the guards return. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of incense and something else. A cloying, metallic odor that made my head swim. At the center of the pavilion stood a large cauldron, filled with a bubbling golden liquid. The source, Eric breathed, his eyes wide. Astrid moved to stand between us and the cauldron. I suppose you're here to destroy it, she said, her tone almost conversational. I'm afraid I can't let you do that. I studied her face, searching for any sign of the woman I had once known and respected. Astrid, please. This isn't you. The venom, it's controlling you. A flicker of something passed across her features. For a moment, I thought I saw a glimmer of the old Astrid in her eyes. But then it was gone, replaced by that unnatural golden sheen. You don't understand, Ingrid, she said, shaking her head. The venom doesn't control me. It freed me, opened my eyes to the truth. What truth? Eric demanded, his hand inching towards his sword. Astrid's gaze swept over us, a mixture of pity and condescension in her expression. The truth that our way of life is doomed. The old gods are dying, Ingrid. The world is changing, and if we don't change with it, we'll be swept away. I took a step forward, my hands raised in a placating gesture. So your solution is to enslave our people? To turn them into mindless puppets for the Saxons? Not slaves, Astrid countered. Survivors. With the power of the Golden Serpent, we can forge a new future. One where Thundercliff doesn't just survive, but thrives. As she spoke, I noticed something. A tremor in her hand, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. Despite her words, some part of Astrid was still fighting against the venom's influence. And what about free will? I pressed, taking another step closer. What about the right to choose our own path? Astrid's composure cracked, just for a moment. Choice? What good is choice when it leads to destruction? I've seen it, Ingrid. The visions the serpent showed me. Fire and blood and the end of everything we hold dear. Visions can be misleading, Eric said, his voice gentle. They show us our fears, not necessarily our future. I was close enough now to see the conflict raging behind Astrid's eyes. Astrid, listen to me. Whatever you've seen, whatever you fear, we can face it together. As a village, as a people, but not like this. Not by sacrificing everything that makes us who we are. For a long moment, Astrid said nothing. The only sound was the bubbling of the cauldron and the distant clash of battle. Then, slowly, she reached into her cloak and withdrew a small vial filled with a clear liquid. The antidote, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. One drop will negate the effects of the venom. My heart leapt. Astrid, you've had this all along? She nodded, a single tear trailing down her cheek. I couldn't bring myself to use it. The visions, they felt so real, so certain. I reached out, gently taking the vial from her hand. The future is never certain, Astrid. But we can face it on our own terms, with clear minds and free will. Just as my fingers closed around the vial, a commotion erupted outside the pavilion. The sound of fighting drew closer, and suddenly the pavilion flap was thrown open. A group of Saxon warriors burst in, led by a tall man with a vicious scar across his face. Betrayal, he roared, pointing at Astrid. I knew we couldn't trust this northern witch. Everything happened at once. Eric drew his sword, placing himself between us and the Saxons. Astrid, seeming to shake off her moment of doubt, reached for a weapon, and I, seeing no other choice, hurled the vial of antidote directly into the cauldron of golden venom. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The cauldron began to bubble and hiss, golden steam rising in great clouds. The Saxon warriors closest to it fell to their knees, clutching their heads and howling in pain. "Destroy it," I shouted to Eric over the chaos. "We have to destroy the source." My brother needed no further encouragement. With a mighty heave, he toppled the cauldron, sending its contents spilling across the pavilion floor. The golden liquid sizzled and smoked where it touched the ground, filling the air with an acrid stench. In the confusion, I lost sight of Astrid. Saxons and enslaved villagers alike were stumbling about, some fighting, others simply trying to escape the noxious fumes. Eric and I fought our way towards the exit, coughing and gasping for clean air. As we burst out of the pavilion, the scene that greeted us was one of utter chaos. The entire Saxon camp was in uproar. Warriors fought each other, seemingly unable to tell friend from foe. And from the east, I could hear the war cries of Gunnar and our Thundercliff warriors pressing their advantage. "We need to find Astrid," I said to Eric, scanning the crowd. He nodded, wiping sweat and grime from his brow. "And we need to get word to Gunnar, let him know the tide has turned." As if in answer to our dilemma, a horn sounded from the direction of Thundercliff. 3 long blasts, followed by 2 short, the signal for retreat. Eric and I exchanged a glance. "Olaf," we said in unison. Our old friend must have seen the chaos in the Saxon camp and realized the Golden Serpent's influence was broken. "Go," I told Eric. "Get back to the village. Help Olaf and Gunnar organize our people. I'll find Astrid." For a moment, Eric looked like he might argue. Then he pulled me into a fierce hug. "Be careful, sister, and come back to us." With a final nod, we parted ways. Eric headed towards the sound of the horn, while I plunged back into the chaos of the Saxon camp. The effects of the destroyed venom were evident everywhere I looked. Warriors stumbled about in confusion, some violently ill, others locked in combat with their former comrades. I searched frantically, calling Astrid's name. Just when I was about to give up hope, I spotted a flash of her distinctive cloak, disappearing into the tree line at the edge of the camp. Without hesitation, I gave chase. The sounds of battle faded behind me as I ran deeper into the forest. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me, but I pressed on. Finally, I burst into a small clearing and skidded to a halt. Astrid stood at the edge of a cliff, her back to me. Below, the sea churned and crashed against the rocks. The same spot where we had fallen just days before, though it felt like a lifetime had passed. "Astrid," I called out, my voice hoarse. "It's over. Come back with me. We can make this right." Slowly, she turned to face me. The golden sheen was gone from her eyes, replaced by a profound weariness. "Oh, Ingrid," she said softly, "always trying to save everyone." I took a cautious step forward. "It's not too late, Astrid. The village will need strong leadership to rebuild, to heal." She shook her head, a sad smile on her face. "No, my friend. My time as a leader is over. I've done too much harm, caused too much pain." "Then face the consequences," I pleaded. "Help us rebuild, make amends." For a long moment, Astrid said nothing. Then, with a deep sigh, she reached into her cloak and withdrew a small, ornate box. "The last of the Golden Serpent's venom," she said, holding it out to me. "Destroy it, Ingrid. Ensure this poison never threatens our people again." I stepped forward to take the box, relief flooding through me. But as my fingers closed around it, I saw a flash of movement. Before I could react, Astrid had stepped backwards over the edge of the cliff. "No!" I screamed, lunging forward. But it was too late. Astrid plummeted towards the churning sea below, her cloak billowing around her like wings. I stood there, frozen in horror, long after the splash had faded. The box felt heavy in my hands. A final burden passed from one leader to another. As the first rays of dawn began to paint the sky, I turned away from the cliff edge. The battle was over, but the real work of healing and rebuilding was just beginning. With a heavy heart, but a firm resolve, I began the long walk back to Thundercliff. The Golden Serpent's threat was ended, but its poison would linger in our memories for years to come. As I emerged from the forest and saw the battered but unbroken walls of our village, I made a silent vow. Thundercliff would rise from these ashes stronger than ever, a beacon of hope and resilience in a changing world. And as for the box in my hands, its contents would be destroyed, its very existence erased from our history. Some secrets, I realized, were better left buried in the mists of time. The future stretched out before us, uncertain but full of possibility, and whatever it might hold, we would face it together, as we always had. For that, I knew, was the true strength of Thundercliff, not in golden venom or Saxon allies, but in the unbreakable bonds between its people. With a deep breath, I squared my shoulders and walked through the village gates, ready to begin the next chapter in our story. The weeks following the battle passed in a blur of activity. Thundercliff, battered but unbroken, began the slow process of healing and rebuilding. As I stood atop the village's central hill, overseeing the repairs to our damaged defenses, I couldn't help but marvel at the resilience of our people. "Ingrid," a voice called out. I turned to see Olaf approaching, his normally jovial face creased with concern. "The council is gathering. They're asking for you." I nodded, taking a deep breath to steel myself. "Thank you, Olaf, I'll be right there." As we made our way to the great hall, Olaf spoke again, his voice low. "There's talk, Ingrid. Some are questioning whether we can trust those who were under the influence of the Golden Serpent." I frowned, the weight of leadership heavy on my shoulders. "We can't let fear and suspicion tear us apart, Olaf. Not now, when we need unity more than ever." He nodded in agreement. "Aye, but it won't be an easy task convincing everyone of that." The great hall fell silent as we entered. The village council, along with several prominent members of the community, sat around the central fire pit. Eric stood as we approached, gesturing for me to take the seat at the head of the circle. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady despite the nerves fluttering in my stomach. "I know these past weeks have been difficult, but I'm proud of how far we've come in rebuilding our home." Gunnar Broadaxe, his arm still in a sling from the battle, spoke up. "Aye, we've made progress, but at what cost? How can we be sure the traitors in our midst won't strike again?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathering. I held up a hand for silence. "There are no traitors here, Gunnar. Those who were influenced by the Golden Serpent were victims, not willing participants." "And what of Astrid?" Bjorn the blacksmith asked, his voice heavy with grief. "She chose to betray us of her own free will." I closed my eyes for a moment, the memory of Astrid's final moments flashing through my mind. Astrid made mistakes, grave ones. But in the end, she helped us destroy the source of the Golden Serpent's power. She paid for her actions with her life. "That may be," an elder named Thora spoke up. "But the fact remains that our trust has been shaken. How do we move forward from this?" I leaned forward, meeting each council member's gaze in turn. "We move forward together. By remembering that what makes Thundercliff strong isn't our walls or our weapons, but the bonds between us. We've faced invasions, harsh winters, and now this poison that sought to divide us. Each time we've emerged stronger." Eric stood, moving to stand beside me. "My sister speaks truly. I've seen firsthand the courage and loyalty of our people, even those who were under the serpent's influence. They fought against its control, helped us in our darkest hour." A thoughtful silence fell over the gathering. Then, slowly, Gunnar nodded. "You speak wisely, both of you. But words alone won't heal the wounds this betrayal has left." "You're right," I agreed. "Which is why I propose we hold a thing, a gathering of all our people. Let everyone voice their concerns, their fears, and together we'll find a way to move forward." The proposal was met with nods of approval. As the council began to discuss the logistics of organizing such a gathering, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to see Helga, Bjorn's wife, and our village healer standing behind me. "Ingrid," she said softly, Might I have a word in private? Curious, I followed her out of the great hall and into the cool evening air. Helga led me to her hut, which doubled as our healing center. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of herbs and medicinal concoctions. "What is it, Helga?" I asked, noting the worry etched on her face. She hesitated for a moment, then reached into a small chest and withdrew a familiar object, the ornate box Astrid had given me before her fall. My breath caught in my throat. The golden serpent's venom. But I ordered that destroyed. Helga nodded. I know, and most of it was, but I kept a small sample. I hope you can forgive me, but as a healer, I couldn't ignore its potential. I frowned, a mixture of anger and curiosity warring within me. Potential? Helga, that poison nearly destroyed us all. Yes, she agreed, but in small doses, properly prepared. Ingrid, I've been experimenting. The venom, when refined, has remarkable healing properties. I've used it to treat wounds that wouldn't close, to ease the pain of our elderly. I stared at her, struggling to process this information. Why are you telling me this now? Helga took a deep breath. Because I believe we have a choice to make. This knowledge could help many people, save lives even. But I understand the danger it poses, the temptation it might present. I sank onto a nearby stool, my mind reeling. The thought of that poison still existing in our village, even in small amounts, filled me with dread. And yet, if what Helga said was true, have you told anyone else about this? I asked. She shook her head. Only you. I knew this decision couldn't be mine alone to make. I stood, pacing the small confines of the hut. We can't let this become common knowledge. Not yet, at least. The wounds are still too fresh, the fear too raw. Helga nodded in understanding. What would you have me do? After a long moment of contemplation, I turned to face her. Continue your research, but in absolute secrecy. Document everything meticulously. In time, when our people have healed, we can revisit this decision. Relief washed over Helga's face. Thank you, Ingrid. I promise I'll be careful. As I left the healer's hut, my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. The responsibility of this secret weighed heavily upon me, but I couldn't deny the potential good it could bring. Lost in thought, I nearly collided with Eric as I rounded a corner. "Whoa there, sister," he said, steadying me. "Where's the fire?" I managed a weak smile. No fire, just a lot on my mind. Eric's expression softened. Want to talk about it? I hesitated, then shook my head. Not yet, but soon, I promise. He nodded, not pushing the issue. Well, in that case, how about a walk? The sunset's beautiful from the western cliffs. Grateful for the distraction, I agreed. As we made our way through the village, I couldn't help but notice the signs of progress all around us. Houses were being rebuilt, stronger than before. The forge rang with the sound of hammers as Bjorn and his apprentices worked tirelessly to replace lost tools and weapons. We reached the cliffs just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. For a while, we stood in comfortable silence, watching the day fade into night. Do you think we made the right choice? Eric asked suddenly. Destroying the golden serpent source? I turned to look at him, surprised by the question. Of course. Why do you ask? He shrugged, his gaze still fixed on the horizon. I've been thinking about what Astrid said, about the world changing, about survival. What if she was right, in a way? What if we're not prepared for what's coming? I placed a hand on his shoulder. Eric, whatever comes, we'll face it together, as we always have, but not by sacrificing who we are or by enslaving our own people. He nodded slowly. You're right, of course. It's just, sometimes I wonder if being a leader means having to make impossible choices. His words hit close to home, especially given the secret I now carried. Sometimes it does, I admitted. But that's why we don't lead alone. We have each other and we have our people. As if to emphasize my point, a horn sounded from the village, signaling the end of the day's work. The sound of laughter and conversation drifted up from below as our fellow villagers gathered for the evening meal. "Come on," I said, tugging at Eric's arm. "Let's join them. I think we could both use some good company and a strong drink." He chuckled, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "Now that's the wisest thing you've said all day, sister." As we made our way back to the village, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Yes, there were challenges ahead, secrets to keep, trust to rebuild, and an uncertain future to face. But looking at the determination on the faces of our people, I knew that Thundercliff would endure. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a perfect day for the thing I had proposed. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, our people gathered in the village square. The atmosphere was tense, with whispered conversations and wary glances exchanged between neighbors who had once been as close as family. I took my place at the center of the gathering, Eric and Olaf flanking me on either side. Taking a deep breath, I raised my voice to address the crowd. "People of Thundercliff," I began. "We have weathered a storm unlike any we have faced before. The Golden Serpent's venom sought to divide us, to turn us against one another, but we stand here today, united once more." A murmur ran through the crowd, some nodding in agreement, others looking skeptical. "I know there are wounds that have yet to heal," I continued, "doubts and fears that linger. That is why we are here today, to speak openly, to listen to one another, and to find a way forward together." For hours, villagers stepped forward to speak their minds. Some expressed anger at those who had been influenced by the venom, while others pleaded for understanding and forgiveness. Through it all, I listened, my heart heavy with the pain and confusion evident in every voice. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, a hush fell over the gathering. Bjorn the blacksmith stepped forward, his usually booming voice quiet and filled with emotion. "I was one of those influenced by the Golden Serpent," he said, his gaze fixed on the ground. "I betrayed my friends, my village. There are no words to express my shame, my regret." He looked up then, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "But I stand here today, free of its influence, ready to make amends in any way I can. I ask not for forgiveness, for I'm not sure I deserve it. But I ask for the chance to prove myself once more, to rebuild the trust I have broken." A long silence followed his words. Then, slowly, Gunnar Brodek stepped forward. He placed a hand on Bjorn's shoulder, his gruff voice carrying across the square. "You were my friend before this madness, Bjorn, and you'll be my friend after. We've all made mistakes. What matters is how we make them right." A ripple of agreement passed through the crowd. I saw tears, nods of understanding, even a few tentative smiles exchanged between those who had been at odds. As the thing drew to a close, I felt a glimmer of hope. There was still much work to be done, trust to be rebuilt, but we had taken the first crucial steps. That evening, as the village settled into a night of reflection and cautious celebration, I found myself once again atop the central hill. The weight of leadership still pressed heavily upon me, but it felt more manageable now, shared among our people. Eric joined me, passing me a horn of mead. "You did well today, sister. I think we've turned a corner." I nodded, taking a sip of the sweet drink. "Perhaps, but our challenges are far from over." He raised an eyebrow. "Oh? What aren't you telling me, Ingrid?" I hesitated, thinking of Helga's secret, of the potential and danger the remnants of the Golden Serpent still posed. But now was not the time for such revelations. "Nothing specific," I said finally. "Just a feeling that this is only the beginning of a greater change." Eric studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Well, whatever comes, we'll face it together. All of us." As we stood there, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, I felt a sense of both trepidation and excitement for what the future might hold. Thundercliff had survived its greatest test, emerging battered, but unbroken. And whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew that the strength of our people would see us through. The golden serpent's shadow still lingered, a reminder of the dangers that lurked in the world beyond our shores. But it had also taught us valuable lessons about unity, about the power of forgiveness, and about the importance of remaining true to who we are. As I raised my horn in a silent toast to our village and its people, I made a silent vow. Whatever the future might bring, Thundercliff would be ready, and I would do everything in my power to lead us into that future, come what may. Months had passed since the thing, and Thundercliff was slowly but surely returning to a semblance of normalcy. The rebuilt walls stood stronger than ever, and the fields beyond were heavy with ripening crops. As I made my morning rounds through the village, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in how far we'd come. "Ingrid," a voice called out. I turned to see Freya, one of our youngest shield maidens, running towards me. "A ship has been spotted on the horizon." My heart quickened. We hadn't had visitors since the Golden Serpent incident, and I couldn't help but feel a twinge of apprehension. "What kind of ship? Saxon? Norse?" Freya shook her head, her eyes wide with excitement. "Neither, from what the lookouts can tell. It's like nothing we've ever seen before." Intrigued and slightly alarmed, I quickly made my way to the watchtower. Eric was already there, peering through a spyglass with a furrowed brow. "What do you see, brother?" I asked as I climbed the last few steps. He handed me the spyglass without a word. As I focused on the approaching vessel, I understood his confusion. The ship was indeed unlike anything I'd ever seen. Its hull was sleek and painted in vibrant colors with sails that seemed to shimmer in the morning sun. "They're not raiders," Eric said, his voice low. "But who are they? And what do they want?" I lowered the spyglass, my mind racing. "We can't take any chances. Sound the alarm, but quietly. I want everyone on alert, but let's not show our hand just yet." As Eric hurried off to carry out my orders, I continued to watch the approaching ship. Something about it tickled at the back of my mind, a half-remembered tale from my childhood. But before I could grasp the memory, Olaf appeared at my side, slightly out of breath. "Ingrid," he panted, "you're needed in the Great Hall. It's Helga. She says it's urgent." I hesitated, torn between the approaching mystery and whatever news Helga might have. "Very well," I said finally, "but keep me informed of any developments with our visitors." I found Helga pacing nervously in the Great Hall, her usually calm demeanor visibly shaken. As soon as she saw me, she rushed over, her voice low and urgent. "Ingrid, I've made a breakthrough with the medicine," she said, carefully avoiding mentioning the golden serpent's venom directly. "But there's something you need to see." She led me to her workshop, where a series of small cages were set up. Inside each was a rat, but what I saw made my blood run cold. Some of the rats seemed perfectly healthy, even more vibrant than normal. Others, however, were clearly unwell, their fur patchy and their movements erratic. "What am I looking at, Helga?" I asked, dreading the answer. She took a deep breath. "I've been testing various preparations of the medicine. In small doses, it has remarkable healing properties, just as I suspected. But if the dose is even slightly too high..." She gestured to the sickly rats. "The effects are unpredictable. Some become aggressive, others lethargic. And in a few cases..." She trailed off, pointing to a cage covered with a cloth. With trepidation, I lifted the cloth. Inside was a rat unlike anything I'd ever seen. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural golden light, and its fur had taken on a metallic sheen. "By the gods," I breathed. "Helga, this is dangerous," she finished for me. "Potentially catastrophic if it ever got out into the wider world." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of this new knowledge pressing down on me. "We need to destroy it. All of it. The risks are too great." Helga nodded, though I could see the conflict in her eyes. I understand. But Ingrid, the potential benefits... Our conversation was interrupted by the sound of horns blowing from the watchtower. The visitors had arrived. We'll finish this discussion later, I said firmly. For now, keep everything under lock and key. Speak of this to no one. As I hurried back to the village square, my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. The approaching ship, Helga's experiments, the ever-present threat of Saxon raids. It all seemed to be coming to a head at once. I arrived at the gates just as they were being opened. Eric stood at the ready, his hand on his sword hilt, as a small group of strangers entered Thundercliff. Their appearance was as exotic as their ship. They wore flowing robes of fine silk, adorned with intricate patterns and precious stones. Their leader, a tall woman with skin the color of rich earth, stepped forward and bowed deeply. "Greetings, people of Thundercliff," she said, her Norse heavily accented but clear. "I am Ada, emissary of the Abbasid Caliphate. We come in peace, seeking trade and knowledge." A murmur ran through the gathered crowd. The Abbasid Caliphate. I had heard whispers of this great empire to the south, but never dreamed they would come to our shores. Stepping forward, I inclined my head in return. "I am Ingrid, leader of Thundercliff. We welcome you, Ada of the Abbasid Caliphate. What brings you so far north?" Ada's eyes sparkled with intelligence and curiosity. "We are explorers and scholars, seeking to map the known world and learn from all its peoples. We have heard tales of the fierce Norse warriors and their remarkable shipbuilding skills. We hope to establish diplomatic relations and perhaps engage in mutually beneficial trade." I exchanged a glance with Eric, seeing my own mix of excitement and apprehension mirrored in his eyes. This could be an incredible opportunity for Thundercliff, but it also meant exposing ourselves to the wider world in a way we never had before. "We would be honored to discuss trade and share knowledge," I said carefully. "Please, join us in the Great Hall. We have much to talk about." As we made our way to the hall, I couldn't help but notice the way our villagers stared at the newcomers with a mixture of awe and suspicion. Change was coming to Thundercliff, whether we were ready for it or not. In the Great Hall, over cups of mead and plates of our finest food, Ada and her companions shared tales of their travels and the wonders of their homeland. They spoke of great libraries filled with more books than I could imagine, of devices that could measure the movements of the stars, and of medicines that could cure ailments we had long thought fatal. As the conversation flowed, I found myself both exhilarated and overwhelmed. The world beyond our shores was so much vaster and more complex than I had ever realized. "Tell me, Ingrid," Ada said during a lull in the conversation, "what is Thundercliff's greatest export? What unique skills or resources do your people possess?" I hesitated, thinking of our shipbuilding expertise, our fierce warriors. But unbidden, the image of Helga's glowing rat flashed through my mind. The golden serpent's venom, a curse, yes, but also potentially our greatest asset if Helga's research proved fruitful. "We are still discovering our greatest strengths," I said carefully. "But we have skilled craftsmen, brave warriors, and..." I paused, weighing my words. "And we possess unique knowledge of local herbs and medicines." Ada's eyes lit up with interest. "Fascinating. Our own medical traditions are quite advanced, but there is always more to learn. Perhaps we could arrange an exchange of knowledge." Before I could respond, Eric cleared his throat. "Sister, might I have a word?" Excusing ourselves, we stepped into a quiet corner of the hall. "Ingrid, what are you doing?" Eric hissed. "Are you really considering sharing information about the Golden Serpent with these strangers?" I shook my head. "No, of course not. But Eric, don't you see? This could be our chance to learn, to grow, to ensure that something like the Golden Serpent never threatens us again." He frowned, clearly unconvinced. "And what if they learn about it anyway? What if they decide it's too valuable to leave in our hands?" His words gave me pause. He had a point. The risks were significant. but so were the potential benefits. "We'll be careful," I assured him. "We'll share what we can without revealing our secrets. And in return we might gain knowledge that could protect us from future threats." Eric studied my face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I trust you, sister. But please, be cautious." As we rejoined the gathering, I noticed Olaf deep in conversation with one of Ada's scholars, his eyes alight with excitement as they discussed navigation techniques. Nearby, Bjorn was examining a finely crafted sword that one of the visitors had brought, his expert eye noting every detail of its foreign design. The scene filled me with a mixture of hope and trepidation. Thundercliff was changing, opening up to the world in ways we had never anticipated. It was exciting, yes, but also fraught with potential dangers. As the night wore on and plans for future meetings and exchanges were made, I found myself stepping outside for a moment of quiet reflection. The stars shone brightly overhead, the same stars that had guided our ancestors to these shores generations ago. "Heavy thoughts, Ingrid?" Ada's voice came from behind me. I turned to see her standing in the doorway, her expression thoughtful. "Just contemplating the future," I replied, "and the responsibility of leading my people into it." She nodded, moving to stand beside me. "It is no easy task, balancing tradition with progress. But from what I have seen, your people are strong and adaptable. You will find your way." I smiled, grateful for her words. "And what of your people, Ada? What challenges do you face?" Her expression grew serious. "Many, as all nations do. We face threats from without, and divisions from within. But we also stand on the cusp of great discoveries, of advancements that could change the world." As we stood there, two leaders from vastly different cultures finding common ground under the same stars, I felt a sense of possibility I had never experienced before. "Perhaps," I said slowly, "our two peoples could help each other face these challenges, learn from each other's strengths." Ada's smile was warm. "I would like that very much, Ingrid of Thundercliff. I think this is the beginning of a most interesting friendship." As we returned to the Great Hall, my mind was already racing with plans and possibilities. The Golden Serpent's shadow still loomed, a dangerous secret we would have to guard carefully. But perhaps, with new knowledge and allies, we could turn even that dark legacy into something positive. Thundercliff stood at a crossroads, poised between the world we had always known, and a future filled with both promise and peril. As I looked around at my people, Eric's steady presence, Olaf's enthusiasm for new ideas, Bjorn's skilled hands ready to forge new wonders, I felt a surge of confidence. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever changes the winds of fate might bring, Thundercliff would face them together. And just maybe, we would emerge stronger and wiser for the journey. As the night deepened and plans for the future continued to unfold, I silently renewed my vow to lead our people with wisdom and courage. The Golden Serpent's tale was not yet fully written, but I was determined that its next chapter would be one of hope and progress, not fear and division. With one last look at the stars above, I stepped back into the Great Hall, ready to embrace the winds of change and guide Thundercliff into a new era. The weeks following the Abbasid delegation's visit were a whirlwind of activity. Thundercliff buzzed with excitement as we prepared for the upcoming trade expedition. The forge rang day and night, as Bjorn and his apprentices crafted samples of our finest metalwork. Olaf pored over maps with a group of our most experienced sailors, plotting the safest route to the distant lands of the Caliphate. Amidst all this, I found myself pulled in 1,000 directions, trying to balance the needs of our village with the promises made to our new allies. It was during one particularly hectic morning that Eric found me in the Great Hall, surrounded by scrolls and trade agreements. "Sister," he said, his voice low and urgent, "we need to talk. In private." The tone of his voice sent a chill down my spine. I nodded, following him out of the hall and down to the secluded cove where we often went to speak in confidence. Once we were alone, Eric turned to me, his face grave. "There have been incidents," People reporting strange sightings in the forest, animals behaving oddly, and last night, one of the night watchmen swears he saw a figure with glowing golden eyes watching the village from the tree line. My blood ran cold. The venom, I whispered. But how? Helga assured me it was all secure. Eric's expression darkened. That's not all. I've noticed some of our people acting strangely. Freya, the young shield maiden, I caught her trying to sneak into Helga's workshop yesterday. When I confronted her, she couldn't explain why she was there. And her eyes, Ingrid, for a moment I could have sworn they flashed gold. I sank onto a nearby rock, my mind reeling. This can't be happening. Not now. Not when we're so close to opening new possibilities for Thundercliff. Eric knelt beside me, his voice gentle but firm. Ingrid, we need to face the possibility that the Golden Serpent's influence isn't as gone as we thought. And with the trade expedition leaving soon, I nodded, understanding the unspoken fear. If any trace of the venom made its way to the lands of the Caliphate, the consequences could be catastrophic. We need to speak with Helga, I said, standing up. And we need to do it now. We found Helga in her workshop, bent over a series of intricate glass vials. She looked up as we entered, her face paling at our expressions. It's happening, isn't it? She asked quietly. I nodded grimly. Helga, I need you to tell me everything. No more secrets, no more half-truths. What exactly have you been doing with the venom? For the next hour, Helga explained her experiments in detail. She had indeed made progress in harnessing the venom's healing properties, but the side effects were still wildly unpredictable. Worse, she admitted that a small amount of the refined venom had gone missing from her stores a few days ago. I didn't want to worry you, she said, her voice trembling. I thought I might have misplaced it or miscalculated my measurements, but now we have a crisis on our hands, Eric finished, his voice hard. I paced the small workshop, my mind racing. We need to contain this fast. Eric, gather a small group of our most trusted warriors. We'll need to search the village and the surrounding forest. Helga, I want you to prepare as much of the antidote as you can. And both of you speak of this to no one else. The last thing we need is panic spreading through Thundercliff. As Eric left to carry out my orders, I turned back to Helga. Is there any way to detect who might be under the influence of the venom? She hesitated, then nodded slowly. I've been working on a test. It's not perfect, but it should be able to identify anyone with significant amounts of the venom in their system. Do it, I said. Test everyone in the village if you have to. But be discreet. We can't afford to create suspicion and fear among our people, not when we're on the brink of such important changes. Over the next few days, we worked tirelessly to contain the threat. Eric and his team scoured the forest, finding several animals that showed signs of venom influence. They were captured and brought to Helga for treatment. Meanwhile, Helga and I quietly tested as many villagers as we could, under the guise of a routine health check before the trade expedition. It was on the third day of our secret investigation that we had our first major breakthrough and our first major setback. Ingrid! Olaf burst into the great hall, his face pale with shock. You need to come quickly, it's Freya. She's not herself. I followed Olaf at a run, my heart pounding. We found Freya in the training grounds, surrounded by a group of bewildered warriors. Her eyes glowed with an unnatural golden light, and her movements were unnaturally fast and fluid as she sparred with 3 opponents at once. Freya! I called out, keeping my voice calm despite the fear gripping my heart. That's enough. Come with me, we need to talk. For a moment, I thought she would listen. Then, with a snarl that was more animal than human, she lunged at me. I barely had time to dodge, feeling the wind of her blade as it whistled past my ear. Restrain her, I shouted, and several warriors moved to comply. But Freya was too fast, too strong. She fought with a ferocity that was terrifying to behold, her golden eyes blazing with an inhuman light. In the chaos, I caught a glimpse of Helga arriving with a vial of the antidote. We need to get that into her, I yelled, ducking another of Freya's wild swings. It was Eric who finally managed to tackle Freya to the ground, pinning her arms. Now, Helga, he grunted, struggling to hold the thrashing girl. Helga rushed forward, pouring the antidote into Freya's mouth. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then slowly the golden light faded from Freya's eyes. She blinked, looking around in confusion. What happened? She asked, her voice small and frightened. As Helga led Freya away for further treatment, I turned to face the gathered crowd. Their faces were a mixture of fear, confusion, and dawning realization. Friends, I began, my voice steady despite the turmoil in my heart. I owe you an explanation. The threat we thought we had defeated, the golden serpent's venom, it seems some trace of it has lingered. A murmur of fear rippled through the crowd. I held up my hands for silence. But we are prepared. We have an antidote, and we are working tirelessly to contain this threat. I promise you Thundercliff will overcome this challenge, as we have overcome every other. As the crowd dispersed, filled with uneasy whispers, Eric approached me. What now, sister? The trade expedition leaves in 3 days. We can't risk sending our people out into the world if there's any chance they're carrying the venom. I nodded, the weight of leadership heavy on my shoulders. We need to postpone the expedition, but how do we explain this to Ada and her people without revealing the full extent of our problem? It was Olaf who provided the solution. A sickness, he suggested. We tell them a mysterious illness has struck Thundercliff, and we need time to contain it before we can safely travel or welcome visitors. The plan was far from perfect, but it was the best we had. Over the next few days, we worked around the clock to test every member of the village and scour the surrounding areas for any trace of the venom. Helga's workshop became a hive of activity as she produced more antidote and refined her detection methods. It was during this time that I received an unexpected visitor. I was in the Great Hall, poring over reports of our containment efforts when a commotion outside caught my attention. To my shock, I saw Ada striding towards the hall, flanked by 2 of her guards. Ada, I greeted her, trying to hide my surprise and apprehension. We weren't expecting you. I sent word about the illness in our village. She held up a hand, her expression grave. That is precisely why I've come, Ingrid. My people have extensive knowledge of diseases and their treatments. We may be able to help. For a moment I was tempted to accept her offer. The resources and knowledge of the Caliphate could be invaluable in our fight against the venom, but the risk was too great. I appreciate your offer, Ada, truly, I said carefully. But this illness is unique to our people. We fear it may be tied to our very nature as Norsemen. Exposing your people to it could be catastrophic. Ada studied me intently, and I had the uncomfortable feeling that she could see right through my deception. Ingrid, she said softly, I consider you a friend, as well as an ally. Whatever is truly happening here, know that we stand ready to help. Sometimes the greatest strength comes from being willing to ask for aid. Her words struck a chord deep within me. As she turned to leave, I found myself calling out, Ada, wait. She paused, looking back at me expectantly. I took a deep breath, weighing my next words carefully. What I'm about to tell you must remain between us. The safety of both our peoples depends on it. Over the next hour, I told Ada everything about the golden serpent, the venom, and our ongoing struggle to contain its influence. To her credit, she listened without interruption, her face a mask of calm concentration. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then, to my surprise, she smiled. Ingrid, do you know why I was so eager to establish relations with Thundercliff? Confused by this apparent non sequitur, I shook my head. Because in all our travels, we had heard whispers of a people in the far north who possessed a substance of great power, a substance that could heal, enhance, or destroy. We came seeking knowledge, yes, but also to ensure that such power did not fall into the wrong hands. I stared at her, stunned. You knew? All this time? Ada nodded. We had suspicions, nothing more. But now that you've confirmed it, I can offer you the full resources of the Caliphate in containing and studying this golden serpent venom. Our alchemists and physicians are among the finest in the world. Together, we may be able to unlock its potential while neutralizing its dangers. The offer was tempting, more than tempting, but doubt still nagged at me. And if we refuse? If we decide the venom is too dangerous to be studied further? Ada's expression turned solemn. Then we will respect your decision and offer whatever aid we can in destroying it completely. The choice, Ingrid of Thundercliff, is yours. As I stood there, the weight of this decision pressing down on me, I realized that this moment would shape the future of Thundercliff, and perhaps the world, for generations to come. The path of isolation and secrecy, or the path of cooperation and shared knowledge, each with its own risks and potential rewards. I will need to discuss this with my people, I said finally. This decision affects all of Thundercliff, not just me. Ada nodded, understanding in her eyes. Of course, take the time you need, but remember, Ingrid, great challenges often require great alliances to overcome them. As Ada left to return to her ship, I stood at the entrance of the Great Hall, watching the bustling activity of Thundercliff. Our people were strong, resilient, but we were also part of a much larger world, a world that was rapidly changing. The Golden Serpent had brought us to the brink of destruction once before. Now it offered a chance for unprecedented growth and connection. The choice ahead was daunting, but as I looked out at my village, at Eric organizing search parties, Helga tirelessly working on her antidote, Olaf excitedly sharing navigation techniques with young sailors, I felt a glimmer of hope. Whatever path we chose, we would face it together. And perhaps, just perhaps, the legacy of the Golden Serpent would become not one of fear and division, but of healing and unity. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, I squared my shoulders and turned back to the Great Hall. It was time to gather the council. Thundercliff's future hung in the balance, and the next chapter of our story was about to be written. The dawn broke cold and gray over Thundercliff, a somber reflection of the day's grim purpose. I stood atop the village's central hill, my eyes fixed on the wooden platform that had been erected overnight. The execution block, a stark symbol of justice and finality, sat ominously at its center. As the village slowly stirred to life, I could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on my shoulders. The events of the past weeks had led us here, to this moment of reckoning. The traitors would face their judgment, and Thundercliff would never be the same. I made my way down to the village square, my footsteps heavy. Villagers emerged from their homes, their faces a mixture of anger, sorrow, and grim determination. Some nodded to me as I passed, while others averted their gaze. The bonds of trust that had once held our community together had been severely tested, and I knew that healing would take time. As I approached the platform, I saw Astrid, the village elder, standing near its base. Her weathered face was etched with lines of worry and fatigue. "Ingrid," she called out to me, her voice low. "Are you certain this is the only way?" I paused, considering her words carefully. "The chieftain has made his decision, Astrid. The traitors must face the consequences of their actions." Astrid sighed heavily. "I know, child, but I fear the cost to our people's spirit may be greater than we realize." Her words echoed my own doubts, but I pushed them aside. "We must be strong," I replied, more to convince myself than her. Thundercliff has survived worse. As the morning progressed, more villagers gathered in the square. The air was thick with tension, punctuated by hushed whispers and occasional outbursts of anger. I took my place near the platform, my hand resting on the hilt of my axe, a reminder of my duty to protect, even on this dark day. The sound of chains rattling announced the arrival of the condemned. My breath caught in my throat as I saw Olaf among them. His once proud frame now hunched and defeated. His golden hair, which had once shone like sunlight, now hung lank and dull around his face. As the prisoners were led onto the platform, A hush fell over the crowd. The chieftain, still pale from his brush with poison, stood to address the gathering. "People of Thundercliff," he began, his voice carrying across the square. "We stand here today to witness justice being served. These men before you have committed the gravest of crimes, betrayal of their own people." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, and I saw faces contort with anger and pain. The chieftain continued, "Their actions have cost us lives, homes, and our sense of security. But let it be known that Thundercliff will not bow to treachery. We will emerge stronger, more united than ever before." As he spoke, I couldn't help but wonder if his words would prove true. The wounds inflicted by this betrayal ran deep, and I feared they might never fully heal. One by one, the traitors were brought forward to face their fate. Some remained defiant to the end, while others broke down, pleading for mercy. But the chieftain's judgment was unwavering: death for those who had directly aided the Saxon raids. Finally, it was Olaf's turn. As he was led to the block, his eyes searched the crowd until they found mine. In that moment, I saw a flicker of the friend I had once known, the boy who had stood by my side through countless adventures and challenges. "Ingrid," he called out, his voice hoarse, "please, I need to speak with you." The executioner looked to the chieftain, who nodded his assent. I steeled myself and approached the platform, acutely aware of the hundreds of eyes upon us. "Speak your piece, traitor," I said, my voice colder than I intended. Olaf's eyes welled with tears. "I know my words mean little now, but I need you to understand. I never meant for it to go this far. The Saxons, they threatened my family. I thought I could control the situation, protect everyone." I felt a surge of anger rise within me. "Protect everyone? Your actions led to death and destruction, Olaf. You betrayed everything and everyone you ever claimed to love." He flinched at my words. "I know, and I will pay for my mistakes. But please, Ingrid, if our friendship ever meant anything to you, promise me one thing." I remained silent, waiting. "Look after my sister," he pleaded. "She knew nothing of this. Don't let her suffer for my crimes." The request caught me off guard. Despite everything, I found myself nodding. "I will ensure she's treated fairly," I said quietly. Relief washed over Olaf's face. "Thank you," he whispered. Then, with a deep breath, he straightened his shoulders. "I'm ready," he announced to the executioner. As Olaf was positioned on the block, I retreated to the edge of the platform. The crowd held its collective breath. I wanted to look away, but forced myself to watch. This was the price of loyalty, to witness its opposite punished, no matter how painful. The executioner raised his axe, its blade glinting in the weak sunlight. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, with a whoosh and a sickening thud, it was over. Olaf's golden head rolled across the platform, and with it, a piece of my own soul seemed to detach and fall away. A wail rose from the crowd. Olaf's sister, I realized. Her anguished cry seemed to break the spell that had fallen over the gathering. Suddenly, the air was filled with a cacophony of voices, some cheering for justice served, others weeping for the loss of those they had once called friends and neighbors. As the bodies were removed from the platform, I found myself moving through the crowd in a daze. The faces around me blurred together, expressions of grief, anger, and hollow victory all bleeding into one another. I needed to escape, to find a moment of solitude to process what had just occurred. My feet carried me to the edge of the village, to the towering cliffs that gave Thundercliff its name. The wind whipped around me as I stood at the precipice, gazing out at the churning sea below. How had we come to this? The question echoed in my mind, unanswerable and relentless. The truth was, there was no simple explanation. Betrayal, fear, greed, all had played their part in bringing us to this dark day. As I stood there, lost in thought, I heard footsteps approaching. Turning, I saw Bjorn the blacksmith making his way towards me. His face was grim, his usually jovial demeanor replaced by something harder, more somber. "Quite a day," he said, coming to stand beside me. I nodded, unable to find words adequate to the moment. Bjorn sighed heavily. "You know, I've been thinking about what the chieftain said, about emerging stronger and more united. Do you believe it's possible?" The question hung in the air between us. I considered it carefully before responding. "I have to believe it's possible," I said finally. "If we lose hope now, then all of this, the pain, the loss, it will have been for nothing." Bjorn grunted in agreement. You're right about that. But it won't be easy. There's a lot of hurt to heal, a lot of trust to rebuild." "Then that's what we'll do," I said, a spark of determination igniting within me. "We'll rebuild, not just our defenses or our stores, but our community. We'll be stronger because we'll know the cost of division." Bjorn looked at me, a hint of his old smile returning. "Well, if anyone can lead us in that, it's you, Ingrid. The people trust you. They know you fought for the truth, no matter where it led." His words, meant as a compliment, sent a pang through my heart. Yes, I had fought for the truth, and it had led to the death of my oldest friend. The price of loyalty, indeed. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the cliffs, Bjorn and I made our way back to the village. The atmosphere had shifted. The initial shock of the executions had worn off, leaving a hollow quiet in its wake. Families huddled together in their homes, processing the day's events. Those who had lost loved ones to either the Saxon raids or the executioner's axe mourned openly. The air was thick with the weight of collective grief. As we walked, we passed the home of Olaf's sister. I paused, remembering my promise. Taking a deep breath, I approached the door and knocked softly. After a moment, the door creaked open. Astrid stood there, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "Ingrid," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought you might come." I nodded, suddenly unsure of what to say. How is she doing?" Astrid stepped aside, allowing me to enter. The small home was dark, lit only by a single candle. In the corner, I could make out a huddled figure, Olaf's sister, Frida. As I approached, she looked up. The pain in her eyes was almost unbearable to witness. "Have you come to exile me too?" she asked, her voice raw with grief and anger. I shook my head. "No, Frida. I've come to tell you that you're not alone. What your brother did, it doesn't define you. You still have a place here if you want it." For a long moment, Frida said nothing. Then, slowly, she nodded. "I don't know if I can stay," she admitted. "There are too many memories, too much pain. But thank you for coming, for not assuming I was part of it all." I knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We've all lost something in this, Frida, but we can't let it destroy us. Thundercliff needs all of its people if we're to survive and grow stronger." As I left Frida's home, I felt a mix of emotions churning within me. The weight of the day's events pressed down, threatening to overwhelm me. But beneath the sorrow and the pain, I felt a flicker of something else, a steely resolve. I made my way to the chieftain's hall where a council meeting was already in progress. As I entered, all eyes turned to me. The chieftain nodded, acknowledging my presence. "Ingrid," he said, "we were just discussing our next steps. The executions may have dealt with the immediate threat, but we must ensure nothing like this can ever happen again." I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. "You're right, chieftain, but I fear that if we respond only with increased suspicion and harsher punishments, we'll only create more division. We need to rebuild trust, not just our defenses." Murmurs of agreement and dissent rippled through the gathered council members. The chieftain held up a hand for silence. "What do you propose?" "A renewal of our old traditions," I said, the idea forming as I spoke. "A festival of unity, where we reaffirm our bonds as a community, where we remember what it truly means to be part of Thundercliff." The council chamber erupted in discussion. Some voiced support, while others argued that it was too soon, that the wounds were still too fresh. But as the debate raged on, I could see the chieftain nodding slowly. "It won't be easy," he said finally, silencing the room. "There will be those who resist, who cling to their anger and fear. But Ingrid is right. We must move forward, or we risk losing everything that makes Thundercliff worth defending." As the meeting concluded and plans began to take shape, I felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but we had taken the first step. Later that night, I found myself once again standing at the cliff's edge. The moon hung low over the sea, casting a silvery path across the waves. As I gazed out at the horizon, I thought of all that had transpired, the betrayals, the losses, the hard-won victories. The cool night air carried the scent of salt and pine, reminding me of countless nights spent here with Olaf, dreaming of adventures and glory. Those days were gone now, lost to time and treachery. But as I stood there, I realized that while the past could not be changed, the future was still unwritten. I closed my eyes, feeling the wind whip around me. In that moment, I made a silent vow to honor the memory of what was lost by building something stronger, something that could withstand the storms to come. As I turned to head back to the village, I caught sight of a group of young warriors training in the moonlight. Their determination, their unwavering focus, filled me with a sense of pride and purpose. This was Thundercliff, resilient, unyielding, and ever adapting. We had faced our darkest hour and emerged, battered but unbroken. And as long as there were those willing to stand guard, to fight for what was right, there would always be hope. The price of loyalty was high, paid in blood and tears. But as I walked back towards the warmth and light of the village, I knew that it was a price worth paying. For in loyalty, to our people, our values, and our home, we would find the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The night grew deeper, but Thundercliff stood strong, a beacon of resilience against the darkness. And I, Ingrid, daughter of Vikings and protector of my people, would ensure it remained so, no matter the cost.